Bienvenidos a otro brown perspective. Close your eyes. Imagine it's 5:45 where you're at right now, and Walter Mercado comes on the screen, and you're paying attention to Walter Mercado with your mom, your grandma, the whole family, because somehow this person is capturing your attention. So, anyways, I wanted to start the episode that way because the new Walter Mercado documentary is on there. So definitely want to discuss it with Romero Herrero, who actually saw part of it. So I'm excited to share this dialogue and also to talk about some of the other controversial topics of this week. But before we get started, how are you doing, Romero?
Good man. I'm thinking if Walter Mercado came on at 5 or was it 7 p.m. for us when we were growing up. I don't remember,
It
but
was during Primer Impacto, and they knew he was so popular. They put him at the end so that way most people would stay to the end just to watch um, Walter Mercado, or they knew that okay, it's 5:30 or it's 5:45. I still have time to catch my horoscopo.
yeah, I didn't know that documentary was out until you told me, and then it made me realize that he did just suddenly disappear.
He
You
did.
yeah, in the late 90s, you he was always on in Primer Impacto, but yeah, he was pretty well known back then. And I did get a chance to watch the documentary. Not all of it. I watched part of it, and I actually thought that you had watched it already as well because when you told me that
No, we're saving it for a special night.
yeah.
Walter Mercado, the documentary, you gotta kind of watch it with wine, relax,
Oh,
be in a
really?
special place, I think. It's a
Yeah,
special, it's a special documentary to watch.
yeah. Well, I'm probably gonna have a different viewpoint and reaction to Walter Mercado than you. So I think
Yes.
today we can talk more about our personal experience and relationship with Walter Mercado, and then next time we can talk more about the documentary.
Sounds good. That
Yeah,
sounds like a good way to split it up.
yeah,
Because I don't know. I wonder who's more of a fan. Well, I guess you reminded me before we started recording about one of the best Halloween costumes I ever did, and that was dressing up as Walter Mercado. So I think that gives you a sense for where we may land on our relationship with Walter Mercado.
yeah. That was a fun one, and you were quite popular too.
The first costume, I've been Simon Bolivar, I've been an Aztec dancer, I've been so many things, Perón, a bunch of things. But I actually had people wanting to take pictures with me because I was Walter Mercado.
Are you sure they didn't
Eh,
think you were Juan Gabriel?
No, I think they was pretty sure. I mean, I was wearing the wig and the
The cape.
makeup and all that stuff, so it was pretty. And I would say I'm Walter Mercado, so I mean, and I
Yeah.
had the cape. I had the cape. I think as soon as people saw the cape, there's like, he's a transvestite or he's Walter Mercado? Who is he? Let's go take a picture.
And that's one of the things that was never clear. He was so ambiguous.
It was. Well, he was, but at the same time, he also had. I remember at one point, it was only him, and then at one point he brought supposedly his girlfriend or his esposa, and she was like an older woman, but she was actually, she was very sexy, right? You can tell that she was just, you know, she dressed sexy. It was like, wait, so is that really his wife, his girlfriend? Like, what is this, or is it just to kind of like help him pass? So that was an interest. I remember that when that happened at some point before he kind of went away.
And did you ever find out if that was his wife or if that was just a stage persona?
I don't know. I think maybe the documentary would tell me more, maybe not. But because I remember they used to kind of like at the end they kind of kiss and stuff. It's like, wait a minute, like so it's crazy, like because obviously he's very effeminate, right? So
Hmm.
it was like I mean, he kind of looked. I mean, his face, was a square, very symmetrical face. His voice was booming. He had a blonde hair. He's wearing a cape, and
Yeah, let me pull up a picture of him.
yeah, I mean, you just
Aquí está.
there he is. And then so it was this whole presentation thing, right? And then the other piece of it was that some of the stuff that he was saying, I think I found one of the reasons I honestly watched it was because I felt that gave me good nuggets of information. Like for the most part, I felt like my horoscopo was, oh, like, oh wow, like I needed to hear that, or you know, I need to keep that in mind. Like I felt like he was a reliable, good astrologer in that sense.
And one of the, because I did start watching the documentary today, and one of the things that I learned immediately from the documentary is that he, by the time I discovered him, he had been doing this for such a long time. Because I
Hmm.
didn't know who this guy was until mid 90s.
Wow.
And I was already in high school when that happened. But he started doing this 60s. Like in Puerto
Hmm.
Rico, he used to do, no, I think he used to do novelas, movies, and he did so much by the time that I started seeing him on TV. So I remember when I used to see him, I
Hmm.
actually wasn't such a big fan. I don't know if you're going to be disappointed or not, but it sounds like you're a huge fan.
So did you watch him, or when you watch it, did you just watch him for like to just see what he was saying, or
No,
did you watch him at all?
I'm not big into astrology to begin with. So he was amusing. He was a
Yeah.
performer, and so I saw
Yeah.
him as a performer. He
Hmm.
didn't actually provide anything of value to me, and so that's
Hmm.
why I was actually, when I was watching the documentary and I was seeing that he had a huge following wherever he went, and that people would line up to see him. I was like, really? Wow, for astrology.
Yeah.
But
Yeah.
obviously he transcended more than that. He transcended so many different things, and I think that's why he was so popular.
Yeah. It's interesting because in some ways, you know, what astrology, magia, spiritualismo have in common is this, you know, it's something that has been shunned because of, I think, our Catholic upbringing. But when you think about it, you know, like Native Americans, Native people, indigenous Americans, people in Africa, they believed in astrology, they believe in magic. So in some ways, is this weird kind of bringing together of sort of the European astrology beliefs, and then some of the things that spiritual and magical things that, you know, voodoo and santeria and all those things bring together, and then he kind of like presents that in a very authentic way. But in some ways, obviously, it's a, to your point, is a mainstream version of those elements. It's almost like pop, someone who's pop, astrology, right? So it's K-pop, astrology pop, J Balvin, Anita.
Wait, what's the connection to J Balvin?
That is just like is part of like, so he, Walter Mercado, brings the entertaining aspects of these cultural elements. So
Uh,
he's not like a santero, like a bruja or somebody, but he's kind of like the mainstream version of that, right?
yeah, I get what you're saying. Yeah,
So it's kind of like, this is kind of like the consumable part of it, of like, you know, this is in some ways a white man taking, knowing that there's a special connection, um, for the people of the Americas with the stars, with sort of magia and all these spirituality too. So he kind of capitalizes on that, and that's why I think he has such a big following.
yeah, I did. In the documentary talks a little bit about his upbringing, and he does look like he came from a background of privilege. I mean, who in Puerto Rico, if you were lower class, would have the opportunity to go to college, and even in college study or have your concentration be dancing, because that was his
Hmm.
concentration, right?
Wow.
And that's more of a career that you're more likely to choose if you have relative stability in your
Yeah.
household, because then that means that you're free to explore the arts.
Hmm.
I'm not saying that people that come from disadvantaged background don't pursue art. It's just, it's a harder decision
It is.
because you have so many people depending on you back home that you're like, "Oh, well, I really like dance, but man, I need to do something and go back home and help out. So maybe I'll just stick with engineering, or I'll stick with something else that will bring more money."
That's why I didn't become a dancer or a singer.
Yeah. Is that what you wanted to pursue?
No, but you bring a good point that it is a privilege to be able to explore that creativity when you know you have the support and the sort of the foundation where okay, like if you need help, your family can help, and you can do really pursue those things that you want to dedicate yourself to. And like to your point, people of all economic backgrounds can do it. It's harder, it's possible, but I think that also means that it takes a lot of talent, planning, and work to make it happen. So
And when I mentioned earlier that he transcended a number of things, that's one of the things that I feel where he did that, because at least when I saw him, I didn't see a white privileged Puerto Rican or a white Puerto Rican that was on TV. I saw this performer that was reading the astrology and giving you your some trying to divine something about your affairs and your life based on your zodiac sign,
hmm
and so he was very universal in that sense,
hmm
that he transcended that, so that you don't people didn't get caught up with the class divisions and saying, oh look, yeah, there's another white Latino with privilege now on TV and he does that. I don't think I ever heard that about him. And
hmm
then the other part is also the guy was ambiguous. I mean, it's pretty clear that he was non-binary, that he
hmm
didn't fit into one or the other. Was he gay? Was he not? I don't think he ever talked about it openly. I read that he always gave you very roundabout answers, but that's another thing that, considering that he grew up in Puerto Rico in the 1950s, but he was able to continue being who he was despite the homophobia that you see in the Latino community.
Sí, Romero, porque lo que se ve no se pregunta.
That was Juan Gabriel, wasn't
I know.
it?
That's
Yeah.
that's why I think so much of. Sometimes I think about the Mercado, I think of Juan Gabriel, and again going to these great artists who clearly they express who they are, they know who they are, you know who they are, but because they don't articulate it, you don't know, right? So there's this still, I mean, some ways it's the sad part of it because it's like, oh, like he didn't feel like he could say he was gay or he was transgender because that would have kind of like made him, you know, not acceptable. But because they never addressed it, but they still were true to themselves, you kind of like, okay. And I think that's one of the reasons that people in Latin America, like, why are you so homophobic when you, throughout our culture, we've always been comfortable with people who are either who are, who are men who are feminine or women who are masculine. Like that has been a reality of our experience and our communities for forever for of our families.
Yeah, and it is interesting to think about how he was able to open a lot of doors for non-binary,
hmm
because I don't think the documentary really got in a lot into that aspect of it, but it almost makes it seem like these shows were pretty progressive. You would see him on TV and you would think, hey, these Latinos are pretty progressive. Look at who they have. Clearly, most people back then would have thought he was gay, just the way that he presented himself.
hmm
Definitely ambiguous, definitely enough to make people question his sexuality.
hmm
But it would give you the sense that the community that supports him, that community is pretty accepting, and that's open about it. But in reality, that wasn't the case. Most of the time, when people imitated him, they imitated him to mock him and to mock his sexuality and to make fun of him. So it's a bit of a contradiction in a sense that he was able
Yeah.
to become so popular in a homophobic environment.
Yeah. It's interesting because obviously acknowledging that we definitely need to talk somebody who's from that community to help us understand the terms and the experience. But it sort of reminds me of RuPaul, right? That's like it's almost that version of that. Obviously, it's a more tame version, but like RuPaul, his show, like making that type of culture and being that way more mainstream, right? So that's obviously it's not as extensive as that because this was the 80s, 90s. So obviously we're somewhat more. Yeah, no, we are advanced. I think we've made strides. I know that we keep going back and forth. Sometimes we take two step backwards, but I know it's certainly better and a more open society than it was when Walter Mercado is. So I agree with your point that he did sort of help open those barriers. And I also acknowledge the last piece of what you say, that it was sometimes it was to make fun of him or make fun of being that feminine, of being gay.
Yeah, we used to make fun of him when I was younger.
Hmm.
But I do want to talk a bit about that because I want to do like some self exploration. I just want to think back on how I used to view him when I was younger. But before I get into that, I had a question for you. So you earlier you mentioned that you used to sit around the TV and watch this. You would watch this with your mom or with your family. It was a family thing to watch him.
Yeah, particularly with my mom, because my mom has been interested in sort of the spiritual side of things. So she always like read the horoscopo.
Mm-hmm.
So when he started doing his horoscopo on TV, at first I was like, oh, that's funny. Like, who is this guy? And then I sat down and heard it, and I was like, oh, actually, I like what he said. Pretty cool
Mm-hmm.
messages. And then it just kind of also became, because Primer Impacto was kind of like the first news, because you got some news, but you also got some of the more sensational
Mm-hmm.
things happening in the United States, but mostly Latin America, which was good. It kind of felt like Primer Impacto was kind of the news from across Latin America, which was nice, and the world too, because sometimes they put things about crazy things going on in other parts. So, but yeah, but it became like like I usually, oh, what time is it? Walter Mercado is almost on, and usually around dinner time too, right? So you're finishing dinner, getting ready to start dinner. So it was like a memorable, enjoyable family time. And then you kind of get to discuss and make fun of the things that he says, or you make fun of the other person. You say, "See, mom, he told you to relax or to do this,"
Mm-hmm.
and then now you just start laughing. So it kind of built this excuse to this ability to connect based on his horoscope
Yeah, so
and people's reactions to it too.
he took on a role of semi guru, semi motivational speaker for it
Yeah.
sounds for you guys and for the people that connected with him, the people that are into astrology that take that seriously.
Yeah, he was our Chopra, Latino. He was a Latino Chopra.
Yeah, that's fascinating that he had so many followers. But now that I think about it, when I think back on high school and my entire community, yeah, most of the people that I knew were into astrology.
Hmm.
I think every now and then I would run into people that just didn't believe in it and thought it was amusing, but nothing beyond that. But yeah, a lot of people did believe in that. So I'm not surprised that he had such a big following.
Yeah.
I can tell you personally, when I was thinking about what to talk about today with Walter, I was thinking back on when I was 16 or 17 and I would watch him.
Hmm.
And what I want to do is talk about that 16-year-old, my reaction and how I felt about him. But it's really hard whenever I start thinking about how I used to be in the past. It's very difficult because that's already it's mixed with all of the experiences that I've had ever
Yeah.
since I was 16. So I don't know if I'm reinterpreting when I was 16 through who I am right now. I was thinking about it today. How could I explain this? It's like a if you think of an upside down tree, and you have all these branches, and the tree when I'm 16 is a certain tree, and then beyond that, I'm a lot older now,
Hmm.
but there's so much more branching. So it's like I have to remove all of the branches that have grown since I was 16 and go back to who I was when I was 16 and try to come up with an accurate assessment of why it is that I used to make fun of him. Because me and my high school friends used to just mock him all the time. We used to
Yeah.
think he was not necessarily a joke, but he was like a caricature of somebody
Hmm.
else, that he was doing it intentionally because it was just his persona, and he was intentionally being outrageous,
Over the
just
top. Yeah.
yeah, over the top, um, just because he knew that he wasn't going to be taken seriously. But
Yeah.
that's not how he took himself. He took himself very seriously, but I interpreted him differently. So I can easily give you a very simple explanation of, oh, he was inconsequential to my life. I wasn't a big fan. I didn't follow him because I didn't like astrology,
Hmm.
and I was okay with him being like ambiguous about his sexuality. That was not it. I had a problem with his over the top persona, how fabulous he wanted to look. That may sound like a reasonable explanation for me to give as to why I wasn't into him when I was 16, but that's me much older interpreting how I thought.
Yeah, I think part of it is you were homophobic, right? You had been taught to,
Exactly. So I'm trying to untangle all of these things that I've learned now because I've evolved more
yeah,
as a human, and I'm trying to see, okay, what was I really thinking when I was 16 and 17? So first of all, yeah, we used to make fun of them because I think it was common in the community to make fun of anyone that seemed different.
yeah,
But here's the other thing, though. I think part of it was also a bit of jealousy
hmm
that he could be so open and comfortable with himself,
yeah, that he can't just be,
that he could be who he really wanted to be, and then
yeah.
he and the haters gonna hate, right?
And like, why am I conforming, right? Like, if he's being who he wants to be, can I be who I want to be?
Yeah,
Am I
exactly, right.
conforming?
Yeah,
Am
yeah.
I following? Am I, you know?
Being a
Yeah,
16-year-old shy kid that maybe you can't even feel like you can be who you are, and then you have this guy on TV that not only is he who he wants to be, but he takes it to the next level. He's wearing a cape.
yeah. And like being a teenager, like if you want to be, if you want to stand out, you got to be confident, right? Because I know as a teenager, you want to both fit in and stand out in a good way. And one of the best ways to stand out is like be really just really comfortable with who you are and with your style, and if you and just go with it, right? Commit to it.
Yeah.
So I think that that's certainly what he did, right? He committed to that style, and yeah, and it worked for him, and for all the other reasons, for the entertainment, for the imagery, because it was who he was. But all of that added to how fascinating he was. And again, it was like he spent on TV. I know he wrote columns on magazines and newsletters and things like that. But it was really only like 5 to 6 minutes that he was on. And I think it was a brief time period of time, but he did that for so many
Mm.
years, so consistently, that I think he just built such an amazing relationship with the public. But anyways, I would love to hear more about your reverse Benjamin Button, trying to understand who you were when you were 16. I think that's a fascinating experience for all of us to try to get there.
Yeah, and I remember back then I didn't know his history. I didn't know that he was so famous before I had met him. I actually thought that Primer Impacto was like his first or second gig, that they had just brought this guy out of nowhere to do the horoscope.
That's the prime time, baby. Prime time on Univision. That's a prime show.
Yeah, but I also have a very low opinion of Spanish network television. So
Damn.
I always felt like they just put whatever they could in front of their audience, and in a way, like they're very disrespectful to their audience with some of the programming that they put on,
Hmm.
like completely asinine stuff sometimes that they put on,
Particularly
and
with women,
exactly, very
sexist,
sexist,
racist.
exactly. And so I
Just
always felt
like,
like they were just very disrespectful to their audience. They didn't take their audience very seriously in some regards. And so I thought that they were just putting somebody on there to read the horoscopes. And so the other aspect was because there's a lot of different variables. So one of them was the fact that I didn't really know how famous he really was. So to me, it
hmm
was just, oh, here's just some other guy on TV. He's ambiguous. I don't really know. Like, he seems more of like a showman. He didn't provide any meaningful value to my life because I wasn't actually. I think I did get a kick out of somebody reading my horoscope based on my zodiac sign because it was just interesting to hear what it was. But then I never took it seriously. I never paid much thought to it. So yeah, it was amusing to hear what he had to say, but I always knew that it was just something made up. And then the other part of it was there was a bit of vanity to him, a sense of vanity in the way that he presented himself. So I think
Yeah.
all of those factors mixed in, including the one that I mentioned earlier, that at the same time, this type of admiration that I didn't want to come to terms with for the fact that somebody could just be so open and so comfortable with being himself. So all of those factors played in, but at the end of the day, I wasn't big into him. He was just like any other person. I don't even, because I didn't even think he was famous. And even then, I don't worship celebrities just for the fact that they're a celebrity.
Hmm.
So I think it was a normal reaction to this guy. It sounded like you had a way different reaction, more of a connection with him. I never really saw a connection with him.
Yeah, no, it was a connection that I felt because of my mom and her sort of belief in it. I think just my also my interest, and I think my interest in that type of astrology to start, because I think, to me it's always fascinating, like how can a when you think about it, like humans have been looking up to the skies for tens of thousands of years, and it wasn't until relatively recently that we sort of lost that connection. Well, at least here in the Americas, and I think in the other parts of the world, we slowly lost that connection with the stars, and being able to not only figure out the stars, but figure out planetary movements that informed things that happen on Earth, whether it was the tides or when to plant or when not to plant, and all these signs, right? So like, there's so much richness that the fact that indigenous communities, Egyptians, and so many tribes relied on the stars and signs from the stars to guide their lives. Understanding, to your point, it's almost like trying to, for us as a society, trying to go back into that stage where we didn't have that scientific understanding. In some respects, that scientific knowledge and understanding came from from studying the stars, right? And studying natural phenomena like gravity, all these things. So for me, I know that there's a special tie and something very true about what the stars tell us. But for me, it was like being able to both think like, oh, he's speaking about my situation, which maybe hundreds of thousands of other people may feel the same way, because perhaps we were born the same day, the same time of the year. There's some things that are going on, but there was that contradiction of like, this message could be redirected right at me, or there's also thousands of people who are going to a very similar experience that are getting this message, or maybe, and when that message didn't speak to me, then I just assume, oh, like, this is meant for another Pisces who's struggling with other issues, not me.
Yeah, well, that's the thing with astrology, that whatever they tell you when they're reading your horoscope, they'll tell you some stuff will apply and some won't, and people just
Well,
not.
and you feel that way too, right? Because I think it's also what you want to accept. Because like, if you get a message that you don't like, you're gonna push that away, right?
Yeah,
So if you,
exactly. That's why it's so popular, because it taps into people's natural inclination to accept the good stuff and discard the bad. And so then when somebody reads you your horoscope, say you're Capricorn or Cancer, and they say something that you do identify with, that resonates a lot more than the five other things that don't apply to you, just because they said
hmm
one thing that does, that you do identify with.
hmm
Yeah, I always got a kick out of it. I'm not saying I, but when I was 16, it was always fun to, mm, more of like a type of a high school kid type of mentality, where a girl maybe wants to read the horoscope and then she finds it interesting, so you find it interesting too because you like the girl, but right, so you pretend like you're into that because you want to,
Yeah. Oh, I
because you
watch
want
Walter
the,
Mercado too. You
yeah,
too?
because
Oh yeah,
you want someone to like you.
let's watch it together.
Yeah, but I had two other buddies in high school that my buddy would imitate him. He would do what was his partying words, mucho mucho amor.
Te deseo paz, pero sobre todo, mucho, mucho, mucho amor.
My friend used to imitate him all the time, so we would laugh. And look, part of it was me just being a 16-year-old kid, and the culture that I was brought up in. And yeah, it was, I suppose it could be labeled homophobic to have been making fun of him. But it
Hmm
wasn't just that we were making fun of him because he was ambiguous and we assumed that he was gay. We were just making fun of him because he was so fabulous and outrageous and over the top in his
hmm
mannerisms and his style. But I'm sure somewhere in there, there's some hint of what I grew up with, because I don't know if I told you the story or not, but when I was still in Mexico, I was I must have been 7 or 8 years old. I
Mm-hmm.
really like listening to Juan Gabriel because who doesn't, right?
No.
My mom had the radio on and I was somewhere in the house and one of his songs was on. I think it's probably Querida because that was in the 80s.
Oh,
And
yes.
the memory that I have is my dad walking in through the living room and he heard that I was listening to it and he
Hmm.
said, apague eso, no escuchamos a ese hombre porque es joto. That's something, he said
Mm.
something to that effect. Like, we don't listen to him because he's gay. And he turned it
Yeah.
off. And I was like, what? You're not gonna listen to him because he's gay? I mean, this is a 7-year-old kid, right? So, but that starts putting into your mind the idea that gay equals bad, and you don't want to
Yeah.
associate with that.
Don't
So,
listen to that music.
yeah, exactly. So you grow up and you grow up in that culture. So I think for me it was very natural to make fun of Walter Mercado. Not because he was gay, but that was part of it, just because of the whole persona.
Mm-hmm.
But now, if you ask me now I feel like, man, as a 16-year-old kid, I didn't know what the hell I was doing or thinking. Now, as an older person, I don't think like that at all. But I do have to acknowledge that I was raised in that culture and I did participate in that
Yeah.
type of ridiculing, which is no different than what they would do even on Univision and Telemundo when they would make fun of them. They were making
Yeah.
fun of all of that.
Yeah.
Just coming clean, just putting it out there.
No, I appreciate that because I think I was in a similar boat as you, but I think so many of us are, and that's part of why we are having this conversation because it helps us understand and process why is it that not only people, but I myself, think and feel those ways because I had a lot of those similar signals, similar experiences too. But for me, it was one, I think, yes, there was this message saying that being gay is bad, but I grew up with a lot of women, and B, I remember growing up with gay people in my life. There were stylists, right? I know that I used to like cut my hair, and like I just knew there were these feminine men that my mom took me to get my hair cut,
Mm-hmm.
and they were cool, they were funny, um, and then also just eventually getting to see folks more openly about who they were. So it was part of it was like, um, damn, they're gay. That's interesting. Like I've been telling not to like them, but they're really funny. They're cool people. Like listen to Juan Gabriel too. So it was this messages of both. This is not cool, but at least it was there, accepting it. So it was more familiarized. So I was a little more comfortable with him. And I think one of the reasons that I think I accepted him. I would like to think that I accepted him, and part of me was like, oh my. So if I like Walter Mercado, does that mean that I'm gay, or is it that I'm talking about his message? So I think that's one of the things that I remember coming up for me, and for me it was just like he just happened to be very entertaining, to have a persona, and also to tell me and my mom and others in my life things that were at least helpful in my own spiritual growth. In some way, it was kind of like a window to astrology, a window to spirituality that now that I've grown, I've explored through very different religions, through my Catholic religion, going to different services, studying the I Ching, going to native practices. So I feel, meditating,
Mm-hmm.
a lot of things that I can trace back from just those first exchanges with Walter Mercado.
Yeah, and your experience, it sounds similar to mine growing up, and it's probably very similar to others in the Latino community. And speaking specifically about me, which again is probably very common to others, when my dad told me not to listen to Juan Gabriel because he was gay, and whatever other messaging that I got about gay people equals bad or something that you don't want to associate with, I didn't grow up hating them. I never had a problem.
Yeah,
So
that's right.
it's not
They
like
never did. They never did nothing wrong
exactly.
to you, right?
So yeah, so when you're growing up as a kid, you are soaking up a lot of what your parents, your community is teaching you, but you don't become exactly like them. You become some other variation of it. And I think the variation that ended up coming as a result of us coming out of that upbringing is that, well, I didn't have a problem with gay people. I didn't actually think there was really anything wrong with it, but I thought it was okay to make fun of them.
Mm-hmm.
That's the one big thing that did come of my upbringing, because
Yeah.
that was the culture. It was okay to make fun of gay people, and that's why even when you see the Mexican national team play, and you hear the chant when the goalie is about to kick the ball,
Mm-hmm.
and they yell "puto," and that's why you were getting so much resistance back from Mexicans saying, because you remember how the team was being fined because the
Yeah.
fans were saying that, and then the fans were pushing back even against the players when the players were telling the fans not to say that.
Yeah.
Well, when that happened, I figured, yeah, just stop saying it, because whatever fun you get out of it, you have to understand that it comes at the expense of somebody else that you're making fun of. So I could say that now as an adult, but a lot of people resist it because in their minds it's still okay. There's nothing wrong with being homophobic if it's for the sake of humor at the
Yeah.
expense of gay people.
Yeah. It's interesting because two things. One is the fact that sometimes when you were not gay, the threat of being made, of somebody calling you gay, that was horrifying to you, right? Like one of the reasons why maybe you dressed a certain way or you didn't do your hair other way because you didn't want to be, thought of as gay and then somebody making fun of you. And then the other piece, and I think Colombian society is also very machista and homophobic. So the fact that we say marica, right? So that's a
Mm-hmm.
big campaign right now. They're trying to stop people from saying marica because I think obviously initially it was like marica being a gay person being a negative thing, like, oh, no seas marica, or seas
Mm-hmm.
marica, all these things. And now it eventually became just like saying friend. So it's like, hey, marica. And you have women and men saying it to each other. So obviously, to your point, at some point, it just kind of becomes so common to think that it's okay to say that, not understanding the the how some people feel when that label is used. And yeah, with the soccer example, it's it's sad because I believe they're still saying it, right? And part of it is it's kind of it becomes kind of like the conversation we're having around the somewhat, not completely the same, but around sort of being, the Confederate flag,
Yeah,
right?
yeah.
Like, hey, Marica, I'm just saying Marica is part of my heritage, is part of my
Mm-hmm.
culture. I don't use it offensively. I just want to be able to say Marica or be able to say puto because this
Yeah,
is what we say at the stadiums. And it's like, well, you could say something else, right? You don't have to
exactly.
say that. So
Well,
it's interesting conversation that we're still having. As you know, one big news is that the Washington Redskins are, after Nike and FedEx um, exerted their pressure. Now the team is moving to change their name, and obviously that's putting pressure on other teams that have indigenous names. But yeah, it's interesting how that works, and there comes a point in society where they say that's not okay. Stop doing it.
yeah, and with the use of the word puto, the common defense that you hear for it is that the people that are using it are not, they didn't learn that word in relationship to gay people or to disparaging gay people. They just saw it as a regular insult. Like, no
Hmm.
seas puto. They just saw it as like, it's not don't be a fag. It's like, don't be, don't be lame. Don't be a party pooper. Don't be an asshole.
Hmm.
That's what they associated with, and especially because that the use of that word has been around for so long that it's evolved. So the newer generation attributes different meaning to it, and it's language. So the word's constantly evolving. The one
They're kind of removed from the
Yeah, they're
context,
very
right? It's kind of
removed
like the
from it.
N word too, right?
Exactly.
Like,
But they don't see, or they haven't, somebody hasn't told them, or they push back and they resist, and they want to stay willfully ignorant to the fact that it's still rooted in homophobia. Yeah,
mhm.
it may have taken a different meaning now, but it's still rooted in homophobia. And if you're at the receiving end of it, to you it hasn't really evolved much. Maybe to you to someone that is on the in the gay community, it's
Hmm.
still a word that hurts. In different degrees depending on what generation you're from. But
And
that's the
your
whole.
rights are still being attacked, right?
Yeah, so because it's still rooted, it's still however tenuous that connection is to the origins of the word, that connection is still there. So yeah, like you said, just find another word. There's so many different words in the dictionary.
Yeah.
Knowing how Mexicans are, they'll probably replace it with another disparaging word for gay people,
Well,
right?
that'll be another battle, right, for somebody else.
Cool. All right. Any last words?
So grateful for the opportunity. Looking forward to seeing the Walter Mercado documentary and then having a follow-up conversation with you to see if it lived up to the or what were my impressions given my obviously more of a fanatic view of who he was.
Definitely. There's a twist to in the documentary. There's
Ooh.
a specific reason why he disappeared all of a sudden. And if you
Mm.
don't know that, then you're in for a bit of a surprise. Don't want to do any spoilers, but
I don't think I know because I think part of why I didn't notice when he left was maybe I think I was getting to another stage of my life. I think it might have been when I went to college when
yeah, it
I
was
think it
around
was
that
different.
time.
So I think I naturally kind of got away from it. And then when I remember I used to go back to visit my mom, I was like, hey, what happened to Walter? He's not on anymore. Who is this guy? Or who is this lady? That's not Walter. And then I
You
was like, oh, if Walter's not on, I'm not gonna watch Primer Impacto. And I feel like it was kind of like part of my evolution. So I think I lost track of him, and I thought it was because of my own process, but I guess I'm looking forward to finding out what really was behind his disappearance.
and you referred to him as Walter, so that just tells us how close you were to him. You can,
Claro.
on a first name basis.
Walter, claro.
Okay, good talk,
Que
pues.
descanse en paz. Bueno, pues, muchas gracias. Remember to follow us, like us on YouTube, follow us on Instagram, Brown Perspective TV at the end. Looking forward to continuing our conversation and exploration.